Hello there, listener. You're listening to Revenue Insights. Today, I'm joined by Dan Waldschmidt. He's the Chief Revenue Officer over at Panzura. Dan, it's a pleasure to speak with you.
Thanks for having me today. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, really excited to dive into things. Even just looking through your LinkedIn, there's so many interesting ways that I think this conversation can go. But for anyone that hasn't met you before or has heard of you, could you give them a little bit of a background check of your story and how you got to where you are today?
Yeah, sure. So, for all of you who haven't met me, I'm Dan Waldschmidt. I'm an ultra runner. I'm a chief revenue officer of a Silicon Valley cloud company that's disrupting the storage space. Inc. 5,000 leader now, as of a couple months ago. That's really amazing. 10th person on the planet to complete the Everest Challenge. And a bit of a tech nerd, I would tell you, a bit of a tech nerd. So, how did I get here? Wow, that's the $64 bajillion question. Look, I am a person who's always looking to do better tomorrow than I did today. Dropped out of college twice, so I'm definitely not doing it on brain power, but I am doing it on willpower, I think. And this sense that no matter how bad things are today, or no matter what I screw up today, there's always tomorrow. And if I use that opportunity each day, I'm not only going to get better, but I'm going to arrive at a spot where I look back and I go, wow, I'm pretty fulfilled. I'm pretty happy. I'm glad I'm here. So it's been a journey, and I'm sure we'll talk about some of it in the next few minutes of our discussion. But I think how I got here is sort of a commitment to always getting better. Which, by the way, if you're in the business of sales, is the only mindset that I've found that helps me weather the storms. Because 2 years ago in 2020, we had COVID and everything went topsy-turvy. People went home, people got fired, people got laid off. Governments gave us money to sort of patch things along and duct tape along. Fast forward 2 years, and now we have these economic headwinds. China has COVID again, apparently. And people are nervous, and Russia's at war, and we don't know what's happening. Trump's running for president again. People are throwing up their hands and sort of bailing water out of the boat, trying to. And the reality is, look, hey, there's always going to be obstacles. There's always going to be craziness. If you're in the business of revenue, there will always be a headwind against you, always. But it's on us, leaders, to sort of keep our heads straight and just improve on a daily basis.
I think that actually kind of sets up for a really nice way that we can start to take this, because, from your experience in your career, looking back to, a period like 2008 when, there was also severe kind of headwinds that sales teams were running through to. Having been through that period and knowing what you know now, and I think something that we'll talk a lot around is kind of things that you have learned of, how do we do better every day? Having been through a period like that before, what are you taking from that into the kind of the next 12 months ahead? How are you planning for your teams and your approach to actually prepare for what is going to be a lot of unpredictability?
Yeah. So lesson number one is don't do stupid shit. So here's what I mean by that. I think it was my mother who said to me, if you can't do something brilliant, don't do something stupid. There's a lot of things we do that are stupid in business. We hire, but don't train. Okay, stop doing that. Train people, invest in onboarding, invest in knowledge systems. By the way, if you want to read an amazing book, I think it's Enemy at the Gate, Stephen Prescott, and talks about the Spartans and how they would shine their shields and they would teach the young, Spartans how to sort of live in the culture. We in sales, we recruit and we tell people, hey, Lee, this is going to be amazing. Come join us. Let's do this. We're going to change the world. We hire you, and then we forget about you. And then 6 months later, we come and yell at you because you haven't produced revenue. And so, okay, let's not do dumb shit. Hire people, onboard them well, right? Pay people what they deserve, right? So that's dumb. It's stupid to hire someone and then underpay them or stiff them on their commission or try to play all these hijinks. So, okay, without getting into a negative track here, there are a few things we do in revenue that are just unacceptable. And in a moment where there's these economic headwinds, there's some fear and doubt and uncertainty in the air, use that moment to just look at like, what are all the things that we're doing that haven't made sense, but we never stopped to clean them up, right? You're growing, you're growing, you're growing, you're growing. And it's like, we'll fix it later. We'll fix it later. We'll fix it later. We're growing. We're this rocket ship is screaming to the moon. We don't have time to fix up our comp plan. We don't have time to fix up our recruiting plan. Now's the time. Now is the moment where you may not be growing as fast, and you have moments to dig in on things like training and hiring and all the different things that, will lead to long-term success if you do it right.
Are there, can you kind of dig into, what some of those kind of, some of those common mistakes are? What some of the common things that you see? I know that you do, I believe you do some consultancy with other like sales and revenue leaders, right? So from your perspective then, what are the common things that you see that bubble to the surface more frequently than not?
Yeah, so one of the biggest mistakes we make in sales is we assume that people solve problems, not process. And it's always process that solves problems. Now, don't get me wrong, there are superstars out there, and certainly everyone listening probably has one, maybe two on their team. But the reality is, if you're going to grow successfully, scalably, predictably, then you're going to need an army, right? A small army, medium-sized army, big army. Let's not debate the size, right? Depending upon where you're going and the size of your investment into sales, you're going to need an army. And you can't have an army of superstars. You have to have individuals who follow a system and a process. And that process leads them to be more successful than they would on their own, right? And so focusing on that process. Without the process, you're left, chasing one superstar to the next. And the challenge with hiring salespeople is, we've all experienced this. You go to hire someone and it's like, oh, I'm the greatest thing since sliced bread. Well, why? Well, I did this and I did this and I did this and this. And it's like, well, why am I hiring you then? Why aren't you the president of Exxon, right? And the reality is, hiring sellers, they're sellers, they're salespeople. They're pitching us, right? It's hard. It's hard to get that right, and we often screw it up. The reality is, we just need to do a better job as team members of making sure that our process, the process that guides us, is in tune to what a normal individual in sales would be doing on a daily basis.
Mm-hmm. And I'm interested to know, in terms of perhaps more anecdotally, in terms of Panzura and what you've got planned for next year, what does the process look like for you guys? What have you kind of built, and how are you aligning your sales teams behind it to kind of carry you into, I would assume, not only retaining revenue next year, but also starting to grow it?
Yes, we've grown at a clip that's just right about 500% growth over the last 20 months. That's a lot. That's a lot, especially when it's millions, right? If you grow from $1 to $5, that's what it is. If you go from 1 million to 5 million, that's something. If you start doing tens of millions and millions, that's something that's commendable. So the team's incredible already. A couple of things we did this year is that we focused on leadership. Again, I'm sort of dog fooding what I'm telling everybody else. We focused on leadership. So I went out and recruited an SVP. And I took my time and actually found someone that I not only had the skills and not only had sort of the competencies that I wanted, culturally lined up to what I wanted to do, but also someone that I felt like I could work with, right? Someone who was, hands-on, shake the tree if things aren't going. So, and then he went and found a whole series of leaders he could work with, right? And so our AVPs are strong, our senior leadership is strong, our sellers are strong. Okay, that all being done took about a year to do, and we have maybe 40 or so sellers on our team. Now it's a focus on targeting specifically our ICP. And I don't want to go too deep into what our ICP is, because I'm sure my competitors would love to sort of try to get up inside my head. But the reality is really digging deep on who we sell to and the specific choreography. And here's what I mean, Lee, if we double click into this for a quick second. Remember a few years ago, what was that play where they rapped about the presidents? Remember Hamilton. So Hamilton was unique, right? The story about Alexander Hamilton. They sort of rapped the music, and it was sort of a neat phenomenon. It wasn't just the music. It wasn't just the talk track. It was the music. It was the sound. It was the lighting. It was the costumes. It was sort of the ticketing. It was the whole theater itself. And often we forget in sales that it's not just about, oh, here's your outbound email, send that. Or it's not just, here's medic, and here's what we're doing with medic. It's about the entire thing, not just the entire thing inside sales, but the entire thing across the entire company. How somebody answers the phone, what our website looks and feels like. All of these different pieces lead us to outcomes that are either successful, we're like, great, that's exactly what I wanted, or it's not as successful as we want, and we need to work on improving that. And so heading into 2023, we're going to focus on growth, but we're going to focus on smart growth, which means we're spending more time instead of just blasting, this sort of, shotgun. We're gonna spend, and I'll say this: our leadership has done a really good job of narrowing the blast, and now we're going to get sniper range. So instead of 12 gauge, now we're down to less than that, and then we're going to go down to sniper shot heading into 23. And so that's exciting. That's exciting because now it means we think we can truly win in a head-to-head battle against our competitors in sort of the most desirable accounts.
Yeah, and I really love that idea of getting smart about it and actually taking the slice that most realistically is actually going to help you to be able to grow. And yeah. I wonder, a really interesting number there in terms of like the growth numbers that you've seen, 500% up, which is great, right? And particularly going into, I think we've seen certainly from customers that we work with a lot of unpredictability from last year where it kind of just started pretty good coming off the back of COVID, and then kind of reality has kind of been setting in going into the latter half of the year. And so what have you find as part of that, what perhaps have been some of the tactics, techniques, processes? You mentioned medic there, you mentioned ICP. Has there been something that you've implemented this year that has been, to you, maybe the first time you've done it, that, wow, that really helped us to hit that number?
Yeah, so let me tell you, this time last year, I was stressed out about the fact I didn't feel like we had a good story. So it's not funny. I guess the word's ironic or annoying, or it's not funny, but it's funny how we're sellers, and we often have a horrible story. Like the story that we tell, the narrative that we tell is lackluster, right? And it's just uninspiring. It doesn't seem to have all the components in it sometimes. That's where we were a year ago. We were. And so I hired an agency and spent a lot of money, $20,000, $30,000 a month. And then I hired a second agency to help us with some other things and paid them $20,000, $30,000 a month. So I invested in this. It wasn't free. So you have to, often invest in a company who could help you do these things. But we worked with two different agencies, and we came away with a first call deck that was just like lights out amazing, like just amazing. And what's cool about it is we went from talking speeds and feeds and technology to be like talking about cloud and how the fact that we're the cloud OGs, right? And here's why, and here's our 40 patents, and bop, 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 sort of hitting people with unexpected lingo, talk track, in a way that gets people thinking, okay, not only do these guys have like whiz bang technology, but they seem to be like, and not that we need to be cool, but they seem like cool people, like people we want to talk to, people we want to hang with, right? It's just like, it feels like this is a company that I could actually partner with, which if you're spending millions of dollars, That's something you probably want to do. Are you working with a vendor that you can actually tolerate? So getting that first call deck was an iterative process. It took us a bunch of time. We got that locked in, and then we said everybody in the company, not just in sales, everybody in the company has to learn it. And once we did that, we then said we're going to have a competition, and if whoever wins gets $5,000. And so we had people pitch, and then once they pitched, we gave out money to the people who ended up winning, and it was, I think we actually gave out a second and third prize too because they were so good. Some of the top ones were so good. People learned it and embraced it, and guess what? Now everybody knows what we do as a company.
I really love that. Storytelling is very close to my heart, I'd say. Coming at it from a marketer's lens, and it's something that in particular, the episode we've been working on a lot. For us, we've got three, fairly distinct products, and when you've got 15 minutes, tops to try and explain to someone what we do, it's like, okay, how does that all connect together? And it was only through storytelling, much like you kind of described there, which actually helped to put it into perspective, right? And I think what's been interesting from my side, to the point that I want to pick up on there, where you've kind of, I wonder how you got the adoption of that. So often it's, kind of senior leadership in the white ivory tower per se, and it's here you go, guys, this is what I need you to be doing. And to reps on the front line, what it can be like. It's, well, I've been doing absolutely fine. I've been hitting my quota. Why do I need this? So perhaps to that specific example, or even to like maybe a bit more broader examples, how are you getting your sales teams on the front ground to actually adopt a lot of the initiatives that you're pushing forward with?
So I think one, we just say that it's got to be done, right? I mean, I don't want to be overly simplistic, but it's just mandated. It's non-negotiable. But behind the non-negotiable language, which can be often strident, is people want to know purpose. What's the purpose of this? Why? Who cares? I'm doing my job, and now you're telling me I got to do a second job or something else on top of that. Why? So you have to walk them through that. You have to say, listen, we all know this thing called first impressions, right? We know first impressions. We know that first impressions matter. You make judgments based on your first impression of people. Now, can people unwork those? Yes. But listen to what we said. Can you unwork those? It requires extra work to sort of reset someone's expectations of you. So let's imagine a world where the first perception of us is the best perception, right? It's the right perception. And so that's where, that's where the FCD first call deck for us is going to solve things. We're going to tell a story that people go, oh, wow, that is exactly who I want to work with. And that is their thought process from the beginning all the way through the end of this journey. So again, it's narrative. Again, goes back to what you asked about earlier. It's, you have a story that you're telling, and part of the story is done internally. It's about why this matters. This matters because if we don't do this now, in this moment, with the right level of purpose and intensity, we're going to do it 50 times after this. And it's never going to be quite as good as if we did it right the very, very first time. So let's get right at that first time and save ourselves 50 other times of trying to fix it.
Yeah, I love that. Dan, something that I wanted to touch on was you kind of mentioned it at the top of the show. You're an ultra runner, which is obscene level distances. And what I'm interested to kind of move this in the direction of is for a sport such as that, is so much of it is around resilience and really being in the top kind of what 1% of runners really to be covering such distances. In using that as an example, and I think we can go into that a bit more as we talk, to put that in a sales perspective, how how valuable have you found that as a kind of endeavor and activity? And what have you learned from ultra running that you actually carry into your day to day, into your work, into the job that you do?
So running from a physiological level, let's not even talk like hypotheticals or like parallels or things like that. Parables. What's the parable of the runner to the parable of the seller? Look, at a just a very real level, there is something about intense exercise that salves the soul, right? It heals you. It heals your mind. For those of you who have your favorite sport, I've got friends who are doing all kinds of different things, from cycling to CrossFit, and it makes you better. I mean, sales is the most neurotic sport in the world. Think about it. What other job says, "Hey, Lee, I'd love to hire you," and you say, "Yes, I'd love to be hired," and then I go and say, "Hey, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to pay you $100 a year, and of that, I'm going to pay you 50 right now. And the other 50 might or might not get paid to you based on your performance, right? And I'm also going to tell you what your performance should be, which will tell you after we're hired, right? I'm going to give you your quota and your numbers and your percentages and all that stuff after you're hired. And, that's where the rest of your money comes from. There's no other job like that on the planet, Lee. I mean, it's sort of, besides being the owner of the company yourself directly, there's just no other sort of position to be in that's like that. So it's tough mentally. You're in a headspace where, like, you have to show up every day and earn your stripes. You do. So running lets you, for me, take a moment and just take that rage, take the frustration, take the feelings of inadequacy or self-doubt, and just pummel it through, hitting the pavement, for 8 miles or 10 miles a day, to just be renewed, right? So that's Lee. I think for me, it's less about, resilient as a runner, resilient as a seller. I think it's more about using that as a tool to just be a better Dan, and a better Dan is automatically going to be a better seller.
I love the word that you use there as a tool. And I was kind of noting down, like, almost as a tool to be used. I'm interested to know from your perspective, when you look at, and perhaps in teams that you've managed and that you've led, what perhaps are the three key things that differentiate a high performing team, that's consistently hitting and beating their quota number, and those low performers who, are falling a little bit short? What are those common threads that you see that really differentiate the best from the best?
Yep. 3 things: focus, mission, details. So let's talk about each 3 really quick. Focus, mission, details. Focus. You can't do everything. You've got to focus on what matters. The high-performing teams know what matters, and they focus on it maniacally. They don't do 10 things. They do 2 things. They do those 2 things with all the effort of that small company running around doing 10 things half-ass, right? They do 2 things really, 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 really well, okay? So that's one thing, is focus. Number 2, mission. They're not selling something. They're on a holy war, right? They're on a mission. And there's, the person who's selling you something, is kind of, you're pivoting, you're sort of all over the place. And a mission-driven person, like, man, they're like a dog with a bone. Like, you cannot stop them from getting what they need, where they want to go. It's a mission, right? And then number 3 is details. Okay. I hear often, and it's been a minute since I've been in consulting, right? Because I bought Panzura back in 2020. And so I've been heads down with this one company, but I would often show up and talk to people, and they'd say, hey, Dan, I'm doing that. No, what you just told me to do, I'm doing. And I would say, no, you're doing something that may look or sound similar, but you're not doing what I asked you to do, right? You're sending an email. I'm saying, send this email in this way at this time to this person. And you're saying, well, I'm already doing it. No, you're sending an email. And the details, the turn of the phrase, the color, the shape, the variety, this sort of artistry is what makes great teams significantly better than anyone else in their industry or their space, right?
I love that point on artistry, and this is an interesting way that we can take it, because I know at the top of the show you mentioned, being a huge advocate of technology, and I've always found, certainly with sales, that you get this blend of it being an art and then also of it being a science as well, right? And so, what's your perspective? Do you see sales more as an art, and the art of the cold call, art of writing that email, right? Building a relationship with someone, or do you see it these days as becoming more scientific? What we can do with different tools to analyze that first call, analyze that email, using data, obviously, which, with revenue operations is becoming more and more prevalent. So I'm interested to know, from your perspective, do you think it's a balance of the two, or do you think it leans one way or the other?
I mean, at the risk of being the boring white guy who slices the toast right down the middle, I think there are pieces of this that are definitely science. There are definitely, like, how many deals number of deals created? That's a science thing. That's a data point, right? Something you should know, have to know, and it definitely leads to your outcomes, successful or otherwise. Artistry is, okay, well, how did you create those, and from what sources, and what sources are better than others, right? There's a blending of these things where, yeah, the scientific part is like the must have, must know, must be, must do. And then there's another side to this. There's like, well, what if we were to tweak it? Maybe we're getting good results already. We want better results. What would we tweak, and what would we do, and how would that look like? That's where artistry comes in for this. There's If you're in a new industry or you're venturing boldly in a new direction, a lot of what you're going to do is artistry. It just is. But you very quickly need to find the pathway to segue from artistry into science. And so that a significant portion of this, 95% of this, should be science. And the last 5 to 10 points of that sort of daily effort should be artistry. Why? Artistry requires a lot of bandwidth, a lot of things. The best artists, it takes time. Best artists, sort of from your soul, it sort of bubbles out, right? It requires a lot of emotional intelligence. It requires a lot of available brain power, thinking time. If you're a seller, you don't have a lot of time to think like that, right? You're boom, boom, boom. You're mission driven. Again, going back to that focus, mission, and details, right? So there can't be a lot of art in this, because if it's a requirement, you're probably going to fail, right? And it's also not scalable. So that's sort of my current thought process on science and artistry from my perspective. It's changed. It's changed in the last couple of years already, my thought process on this. But it just, looking at this current company and the companies we have supported in the past, look, you need a process.
And I wonder then, it's evidently edging more in the, needing that scientific part to it, needing that data to be able to, make better decisions ultimately at the top of the tree. So I wonder, in your world, when you look at, supplementing the artistry of your team, shall we say, what tools in the tech stack do you find essential in enabling them and ultimately to elevate them and actually deliver more results?
So you obviously need a CRM. We use HubSpot. We use HubSpot for everything, for marketing, for sales, for service, for tickets. We use it for operations. We use HubSpot everywhere. You need some sort of tool to stay organized around it, whether it's something that's free, it's a plug-in to Google Apps, or whether you use, all the way up to like Salesforce.com, right? Or something like that. It doesn't matter. You need a platform like that. I think there are a bunch of tools that do intelligence. Databook is one. Try databook.com. There's 6 Sense. There's a few. There's Demandbase. I think in today's world, if you don't have access to a platform that takes all of this, what's happening in the industry, and distill it down into some talking points for you, you're already running behind what your competitors are doing. Right? Those are sort of two categories I see as like must-haves.
I love that. Dan, I'm interested to know, in the here and now, we're speaking, literally the week before Christmas of 2022 at this point.
Yeah.
I wonder what is one of the biggest challenges that you're trying to solve right now? What keeps you awake at night that you're trying to get to the bottom of, particularly heading into next year?
Yeah, so it's a personal challenge. It's my ability to communicate risk and progress to the rest of the organization. Because if we're a software company, I need to be able to communicate risk of lack of features or risk of blocking inside the application. I need to communicate that in a way that someone says, "Oh, I need to fix that, and I need to fix it now." Right, and that across our different departments, whether it be finance and working with finance on specific sort of budgeting, whether it's engineering or services, communicating is key. And I'm often so busy and so stressed that if I do have a conversation, it's like, I'm shaking someone about the throat rather than like calmly, quietly, logically walking them through the problem in front of us. So I think that's the current challenge that I have.
How are you, out of interest, can you perhaps shed a light on how exactly you're trying to solve that at the minute? And I guess more specifically, by the sounds of it, how you're working on improving your communication skills to be able to get the message across to your different departments.
Yep. So anytime I have a major objective like this, I normally go get help. So I'll normally either find a training program that I can deploy and use those skills, or hire a coach. I mean, I could figure it out on my own by trial and error, but when you have something like this that's urgent, it feels like you shouldn't sort of take this cavalierly, right? So, for example, if you had sort of a heart murmur, not a heart attack, but a heart murmur, you probably, wouldn't just say, well, it's okay, it'll work itself out. You'd probably get a little help, get some advice, get some people looking under the hood, right? See what's going on. And then you would know exactly how to proceed, how to stay healthy so it doesn't get worse, right? Same thing here. It's like, it's not working right. Why don't I get help? And that's going to start with some sort of coach or some sort of training platform or something like that. The other thing is, so what causes poor communication? Well, me blowing up at people. Well, why am I blowing up at people? Well, I'm stressed. Okay, let's play this game again. Well, why are you stressed? Well, you're stressed because you're not sleeping. Why are you not sleeping? Well, because you're stressed. Well, we could keep doing that game all day long. But the reality is, there's a quote Vince Lombardi said years ago. He said, "Fatigue makes cowards of us all." In other words, you're not sleeping enough. You're just not, you're not making good decisions. So, okay, well, what if my communication were directly linked in some way to my sleep? So maybe my real goal is, hey, I'm going to go sleep. I'm going to make sure I get at least 5 hours of sleep a night, right? And then what if I said, wait a minute, it's not just sleep, but it's running. And running helps me clear out some of my frustration. So now I'm clear-eyed from sleeping, and now I'm frustration-free, or less frustrated, from running. And now step 3 is, now let me go communicate, right? So that's how I'm thinking about solving for this challenge, right? Is get some external help, but then internally, be a much better version of myself right away.
I love that. As we kind of move to wrap up our conversation today, I did want to touch on, you mentioned it at the top of the show, running Everest. I'd love to understand a little bit more, what it is, but also kind of your motivation behind it. I feel like you've kind of alluded to it a little bit, like through our conversation, where that is a running is almost an outlet. I sense for you, and so would love to just get a bit more kind of context on that and why it's so valuable for you.
Yeah, so for me, running's always been emotionally an accelerant, right? Helps me mentally, spiritually, and physically as well. The Run Everest Challenge was one I saw. I heard about it. I thought, why can't I do that? Why wouldn't I want to go do that? And so I set about putting a few things in place. I didn't really do a lot of training because I'm always training, but I put in place a little bit more uphill work. It's 29,000 feet of uphill elevation, of course, on Everest. And so, you find a hill, could be no downhill. No time, you can't rest, you can't sleep. And you basically have to run 29,000 feet straight up in the area. And if you do that, and there's a lot of governance around it, then you get rewarded with this Everesting trophy. And so, we just set out one weekend and plugged in, and I think it was like 25 hours later we had finished the whole boondoggle. So why though? Why? What's the mindset behind it? I said this before. Why not? Right? Just sort of pushing on who I am. Why not do it? Right? Why? To sort of prove that we can, and not in sort of a thump your chest sort of way, but a thump your brain sort of way. A inside your own head, know that despite whatever is going on in the world around you, that you've got this, right? You've got this. It's going to be okay. You are going to crush it. Life is going to be amazing.
I love that. Dan, last question. And I caveated this yesterday because what's so interesting coming into these conversations is I'll do a bit of Googling around people. And that's when I came across, firstly, your kind of the Everesting challenge. And it was like, okay, well, this is going to be a great one to go down. The second was that you've written a book in the past. Now, we chatted about this kind of pre-show. You were like, no, I won't recommend my own book, which I love. But if there's one book that you would recommend to other revenue leaders, and perhaps to be more specific, let's say other chief revenue officers, in a similar role as you, which book would you recommend to them?
Yeah, it would be Becoming Supernatural, by Dr. Joe Dispenza. Joe Dispenza is a PhD. Actually, he's a board certified neuroscientist and talks about how the brain works and how the brain sort of guides what you do. And I got to tell you, it changed my life. There's not many people that I consistently go to, and it's always better, right? It's like sometimes you meet someone and you're like, wow, that was a great meeting. And you realize the second time you go back, oh, you got all their juice. Like everything they know was in that meeting, and now there's nothing left. There's a guy that every time I'm engaged with or talk or part of sort of a group discussion, it's just a wise, inspiring person. So Becoming Supernatural, Dr. Joe Dispenza, mind-blowing.
We'll pop a link to it down below, and I'll give it a read and let you know. Dan, it's been absolutely fantastic to have you on and to pick your brain for a little bit. For those listening at home, if they want to connect, reach out, learn a little bit more about what you're doing, where can they find you?
Yeah, I mean, you could find me on LinkedIn. It's just if you do danwaldschmidt.com, I think it forwards to my LinkedIn account. But yeah, I'm on LinkedIn right now, and look forward to getting your message.
Awesome. We'll pop a link to that down below. Well, once again, Dan, thank you so much. It's been a fantastic conversation. And to everyone that's listened to the episode this week, thank you so much, and we'll see you next week.